With lawsuits coming in from multiple sides, the ACC being on thin ice is not surprising. The goal for those schools is to keep it together, but if it can't, is Pittsburgh a Big 12 program? This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thanks for making this show your first listen every single day. Today, joined by JJ Kitchen of Talking CFB with JJ. Look, this guy is a Pitt expert and knows what it's like to be a Pitt Panther, and maybe we'll know what it's like to be a Pitt Panther in the Big 12 in the next 3 years if things go the way that I want them to go. There are Big 12 fans that are screaming NC State, Louisville, Pitt. If Florida State and Clemson are off the table, Pitt is one of the most valuable schools in the ACC to the Big 12. JJ will start it off hot. The idea of Pitt being a Big 12 team in 3 to 5 years, how does it make you feel inside?
So I think, first off, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate your show. You do a hell of a job, so I appreciate you having me here.
Thank you.
I think it would be interesting. I think the majority, when you look at the fan base and here at Pitt, whether it's in the Pittsburgh area, obviously, I think that they want to stay in the ACC. I think that the way that Pitt really goes to the Big 12 at this point would be if more than Clemson and FSU get out. I think that's when you start to really have the conversations. Me personally, I know from coaches that I talk to, athletic administrators, I do know every school in the ACC has talked. Everyone has certainly looked at the grant of rights. Everyone's looked at the legal issues. But I think that, you look at both of these conferences, we're both, when you look at tough spots, just battling the SEC and the Big 10,
100%.
I've got a lot of respect for the Big 12. I think they've got a lot of good football teams. I think they do a really good job of branding. Obviously, Brett Yormark, really working outside the box. It'd be a lot of different teams for Pitt, that's for sure. And it'd be different markets. You look at SMU coming to the ACC, with the Texas market, Pitt fans were already talking about buying tickets and going to that game. So it'd be cool to go to the Big 12. In heart of hearts, will that happen? There's still a chance it does happen. If more than FSU and Clemson gets off the table, I think we start to really have that serious conversation. But I think when you look at both these two conferences, I think that really the really disappointing part is I think they're really undervalued, to be quite honest with you. I think that when you look at the top two conferences that they call the Power Two, I think they're the Power Two just because of revenue-wise. I think when you look at the talent on the board, you look at every one of these teams, whether it's the Big 12, you've got now Utah, Kansas State, who's been a force in the Big 12 for many years. Obviously, you got West Virginia. I think they've had a good year last year, bouncing back after a number of years. Then the ACC, you still got NC State, North Carolina, Miami, big brands. I would be happy if Pitt went to the Big 12 if they had to. In heart of hearts, I think we're just trying to fight the world in terms of trying to not ruin college sports. But at the end of the day, if we had to go to the Big 12, I think Pitt fans would embrace it if it was that last option.
I want to emphasize, JJ, and you touched this early. I'm glad you did. This is not a when, it's an if. We were having the same conversation about TCU 3 years ago. Do they go to the Pac-12? Does Oklahoma State try to find its way into the SEC? When we thought the Big 12 was on thin ice, obviously Brett Yormark and even Bob Bowlesby at the end of his tenure were able to hold things together. It feels like not just the lawsuits, though, and even the ESPN contract negotiations that really heat up in 2025 through 2027. Those are big, but I circle kind of that magnificent seven we mentioned roughly a year ago of teams that originally explored the idea of how to move forward in the ACC with or without it. That was Florida State, Clemson, Miami, North Carolina State, Virginia, and Virginia Tech. Pitt was one of the loyal schools who stayed outside of those conversations. JJ, looking at today, in May of 2024, was that a good or a bad move?
At the end of the day, I think it's loyalty towards the ACC. Do I think that the way that Pitt does things? I think they went the opposite way of what FSU and a bunch of these schools were doing. Is really just keeping our ideas and behind closed doors. I know they certainly reached out to certain conferences, and before Oregon and Washington were officially added to the Big 10, there was conversation about that. Do they add more teams on the East Coast? Do they add a West Virginia? There was a whole bunch of conversations what's being thrown out there. I think, honestly, I don't mind it because the real question comes down to what is each individual school looking to pay? What are they willing to pay to get out of the conference? Because there's really two scenarios in this whole entire thing where FSU, let's say they win the lawsuit, they pay nothing. Then I think that you have a real conversation that the ACC falls apart immediately because you're able to get out for nothing. Do I think that's going to happen after talking to attorneys and what really goes on behind closed doors? I don't see it. I think that you're going to have a big dollar amount. It's going to come down to schools that want to pay that. And, if it's large, if it's over $300 million, you're going to have two schools potentially, maybe even just one. And I think Florida State's going to get out regardless. It doesn't matter what the cost is. I think Clemson's on the border for what their complaint is and what their lawsuit is. It's a lot worded. It's really worded differently than what FSU's is. They're saying they claim that they're still an ACC member. Clemson is, and they're just looking to see what it takes to get out. I think if it's over that, really, I would say even 250. The 250, I think that really FSU only gets out, that only wants to pay that. But I think overall, when you look at this league, if it's easy to get out, I think everybody gets out. And I think maybe there's even a conversation about the Big 12 and ACC really joining forces, and that's the only way they can really survive. At the end of the day, it's a tough dilemma. It really is. But, you look at these teams, the last thing I would want to have happen to any school from top to bottom, whether it's the Magnificent Seven, anybody outside the Seven, anybody who has other motives, don't want to see another Oregon State or Washington State. So hopefully something gets approved here soon. But this lawsuit will really tell us where we're going. And I still think we're a far ways out. Obviously FSU had a little bit of a setback having to refile here, falling behind in terms of a timeline with going to court, in North Carolina. But I think overall we've got some time left, but it's a predicament. I mean, it certainly has every school in the ACC having a conversation in the athletic department and in their chancellor's office saying, what are our options and what do we do? So it can be unsettling at times. How long does it take? But I can assure you this, every school, they can tell you they're not. Every school right now is certainly having that conversation. It's ongoing thoroughly.
You're clairvoyant. I'm so glad that you brought up a Washington State and Oregon State, who I vied for on this show as two brands. Washington State from a TV revenue standpoint, who's right there. They deserve to be a power school. Oregon State, who's been there right behind them. And for Pitt, we don't talk about the Panthers, especially the market size, getting left out in realignment. We do talk about Boston College or Syracuse or Wake Forest not being there. What separates Pitt from being in the category of the bottom end ACC schools that might really have a murky future?
So I think just overall brand. I mean, you look at the overall history of the University of Pittsburgh. I mean, may have been a long time ago. The last national championship may have been 1975. I'm sorry. But Pitt's got 9 national champions. They've got 12 Hall of Famers. There's 3 more currently in the league. Aaron Donald will be there, Larry Fitzgerald, Tony Dorsett. Yeah. The list goes on and on of the heritage of what Pitt football is in the city of Pittsburgh. And the one thing that really sets aside from those other places is that, you look at Aliquippa, places like that around the country that are well-known high schools just here in Pittsburgh. It's clear, the conference in general knows how much of a great brand this truly is. Heard it from numerous coaches outside the ACC, athletic administrators. There's a lot of respect for it, but also too, besides a year last year where it was just really a horrible year overall for Pitt. I think the ACC championship game in 2021, 2022, they have 9 wins. They win 20 games in 2 years. When it comes to draft picks, Pitt's second in the ACC in the last 6 years in draft picks. I just think that overall it's a great brand, and I think that keep it level headed to where it's certainly not a brand like an Alabama or Georgia, anything like that. It's not crazy or nothing, but I think overall when you look at this university, it's a top 30, top 25 brand because of what the history entails and how long and how many championships and just the success that it's had in football and basketball, which are really what it comes down to. It'll be football, but 2 overall sports that really drive the university. It's the front porch of every university, being football and basketball. But I just think that the northern schools at this point, the Syracuses of the world, Boston College got a rich tradition, but the Boston market, how much do they really and vibe with Boston College? That's a question mark. Wake Forest being the smallest Power 4 school in the country. Those schools, I think they're going to have a tough time, but I think there can certainly be a discussion to where you really have a conversation that says, hey, let's really involve every market here in the country, make sure we keep our viewership up to make sure we still have money coming in.
JJ, I value Pitt enough to want them in the Big 12 moving forward if the option comes on the table, but I know there are fans who are going to push back on that. Let's talk about that coming up next here on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Look, I got a car sitting outside a Nissan Maxima 2016. 2016 is a little bit ago. It's 8 years old, and sometimes things fall off of that car. I walked out the other day, and I heard there was a plastic piece dragging underneath my car. So I took some scissors, I got underneath the vehicle, and I cut it off. That's not good, but it is you have eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships also keeps your ride or die alive. Mine's alive thanks to eBay Motors. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, or just keeping your car alive, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, I said eBay Motors. 2016 Nissan Maxima, plastic piece underneath. It showed me plastic pieces underneath the Nissan Maxima. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. Make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit. Only available to U.S. customers. JJ, one of the reasons that we talk about contingency plans for a Pitt or an NC State or North Carolina is because everybody has one, just like TCU had one 3 years ago when it looked like the Big 12 would fall apart. I'm sure the athletic department at Pittsburgh has had the discussion of where to next if there is a next outside of the ACC. But when Pitt fans hear Pittsburgh, Big 12, that's not as sexy as the Big 10 or the SEC. Let's start off here. Does it feel like the fan base itself would moan and groan if the only option is the Big 12 conference?
I think moan and groan. I don't think so. I think if that's really the only option to survive in terms of the Power Three, if something would happen with the ACC where it collapses, I don't think so, because you look at, again, like I talked about with the teams that are currently in there. I think what's really good is what will really help Pitt out, that where they don't have to deal with what really West Virginia is going through, is the travel. Yep. I think that, they'll certainly add teams like people that I think we look at as rivals in the ACC, the Virginia Techs, the Miamis, people like that, for instance. But you look at overall the Big 12, I like Oklahoma State a lot. I like Mike Gundy and how he coaches. Obviously, you have West Virginia. You got Cincinnati, two rivalries that we have there. We currently have them on the schedule with an out-of-conference. I think that the backyard brawl being renewed has been huge, not just for the city of Pittsburgh, not just for Morgantown, but overall across the country with how much viewership. The renewal of the backyard brawl brought over 5 million viewers. It's a good conference, man. And I think overall, I think that, you look at it, the Pitt fans, they really wouldn't be upset if that was the last option. I think in a perfect world, would fans want to go to the Big Ten, where you're in Big Ten country, and perfectly, obviously. But I think when you look at, if it's really the only option left and you had to make a decision, nothing wrong going to the Big 12 and really having a conversation that says, hey, you know what, we link up with a bunch of teams from the ACC that go over to the Big 12. You're going to a good basketball conference. You can certainly battle in terms of football. I think the only way they wouldn't be upset is if by some chance that we were the only ones that would go over there with maybe one or two more schools. I think when you add really 4 or 5 more schools from the ACC, if they were to go over the Big 12, it makes the conference a whole lot better. You grab them really big brands. You really have a conversation of really taking the Big 12 to the next level. I really think that's probably how I see it. I think the Pitt fans in general would be really happy about that if we grab more ACC teams that came along and said, hey, look at the battles and the traditions of what we have coming forward.
I don't think, Dennis Dodd released an article with CBS Sports saying there was an emergency scenario where Florida State and Clemson go to the Big 12. I think that is completely far-fetched and frankly impossible. However, there is that mid to even upper tier of ACC schools that the Big 12 will certainly go after in the event Clemson especially is officially out of that conference. That being said, JJ, you gave me a very positive twist. I was supposed to be on what was a dour question here. Is there a con then? I mean, is there one thing you point to and say, I don't want to be in the Big 12 because of X, especially if the ACC is still on rocky front?
I would say the only reason that I would say that I wouldn't want to go to the Big 12 is if it's just Florida State and Clemson that get out. I think that the overall brands in the conference are certainly superior. I mean, there's great brands in this conference. And I think that certainly you'll have a conversation that Oregon State and Washington State get added. You'd probably have a conversation with USF. But the minute you start to dive into potentially Florida State, Clemson, Miami, UNC, NC State. Once you hit that 6 or 7 schools, you got to start having a conversation that says, hey, you know what? It's time to jump ship. It's time to get a hold of something else. I would say the only way that I would be upset about going to the Big 12 is if those top 2 schools really only leave and then we leave and then the money's the same. If the money's the same, it's kind of like, why are we jumping from one puddle to another that we're still in the same spot? We're going to another conference that's not part of the Power 2. Yeah. That would kind of be like a head scratcher to me. But that's kind of, besides that, that's really about it. That would be the only negative. But besides that, there are just plenty of positives.
Did you feel like with the addition of Cal, Stanford, and SMU, because at the time it was really based around keeping that number at 15 via the ESPN contract, the more that we've learned and that ESPN can back out in 2025, officially cutting ties in 2027, does it feel like that move with those 3 teams is less meaningful today than it felt 6 months ago?
Believe it or not, I keep it the same. And the reason why is because, you keep those schools in there, you add the numbers, and no matter what happens, if you had 2 or 3 schools leave, you're good. But then if the schools, let's say, hey, for instance, if ESPN does back out, hey, at the end of the day, they tried something to make sure they were in a position that, thank God, that if something did happen, hey, that's what happens. But at the end of the day, I think it was a necessity move to where they were. Would you have liked to add, I think Stanford's an overall great athletic department and the Director's Cup. They do a hell of a job. Cal, maybe not as great of an ad. SMU really bought themselves, really bought them, a way into the Power 5 or the Power 4, excuse me. But overall, I think that the ACC had to do what it had to do to keep those numbers where they are, keep the contract to where it is. But if they don't renew, or if they do cut the contract out in 2025, which we're going to find out here in next February, we're going to find out. Then, hey, regardless, they were going to go down regardless. But I think they needed to have a backup plan. They had to do something with numbers. But I just think overall, if they would have known beforehand about Oregon State and Washington State, I think we're having a different story in terms of which teams we were adding and whatnot. I think heart of hearts, you're probably looking at the ACC wishing that something would have happened with Oregon State and Washington State earlier, because it put them in a jam. You probably would have had 2 more better teams for sure. But overall, I think they had to do what they had to do.
Coming up, let's talk about that timeline of 2025 and ESPN cutting within 2027. If that happens, is it more likely the ACC is standing on even thinner ice than it sits upon now? This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Look, people say that I'm competitive. I am competitive. You can find me with my IBC root beer hanging out on the front porch playing Monopoly Go, or find me in my car, parked, not driving, also playing Monopoly Go. Take the classic board game that you play, that we've all played, and play it against your friends and beat your friends, or beat me. You cannot. Right now, you can do timed tournaments where you work together or work against one another to build up or tear down each other's boards. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to compete, albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Personally, my favorite part. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new. It's exciting. Every day it feels even more exciting because there's always these new events and massive multipliers for everything you win or even rent frenzies. There is something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, and it changes all the time. So get off the bench. Go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. It is Monopoly Go. It'll keep you on the go, competing against your friends, and I promise it's the most fun app that's out there right now. That's why I can't stop playing it. It is Monopoly Go on the App Store or at Google Play today. JJ, we know now that ESPN can opt out of its contract with the ACC in 2025 and be gone entirely by 2027, or even restructure that sucker. If that is the final decision from ESPN coming up in less than a year, do you think there's still a path forward to the ACC staying alive, or then is it time for Pitt to rediscover itself in a conference like the Big 12?
I think at that point to where, ESPN has that conversation, they say, look, we're not going to renew. We're going to decline the option, and we'll go from there. I think immediately you go into pressing to where, you have to have options. If I had to bet, I'd probably, ESPN would have a shorter stake. And I think you'd probably, from what I've been told from numerous people, Amazon's been looking to get in the game. Apple being Obviously, the CEO, Tim Cook, being a Duke alum, I'm sure he would get involved because he wanted to get involved with the Pac-12. You get other people involved like that. You probably keep the CW for a national platform. But overall, I think immediately you send every school into a certain point to say, hey, we have no media contract. You have to look. If you don't look, you're not doing your university justice. You're actually hurting your university by not looking. So I think overall, if a contract does get, the option does not get renewed, I think immediately you have schools looking to jump ship. And I think that the Big 12 will certainly have their picks. And if your mark comes across the board and says, hey, here's our offer, you get pro rata, you're coming over here, you get a full stake. Plus on top of that, till 2031 contract is when our contract, the Big 12's media rights goes till. I think overall it's a good shot. And if it makes sense, you got to do it. And I think you don't even wait for the next offer or counter offer. But that would be, in my opinion, if they came out in February and said we're not renewing, then yeah, they're in trouble.
The reason that I am so confident in Pitt staying alive moving forward, and again, it's tough to be for a school like Wake Forest. The reason why I am with Pitt, they're sitting per the EADA and these latest numbers that really hover around 2022 alongside schools like Ole Miss, Baylor, North Carolina, Arizona, UCLA in the 30 to 40 range of athletic revenue. Now, EADA isn't always exact. A lot of that comes in is big donor money, but the higher you are, the better spot you're in. And Pitt is in a very comfortable spot money-wise. They're also in a spot that lines up with the Big 12. There's a good swath of teams from the conference that are right there, which is why I think this makes the most sense. And I'm going to go back to a point that we've already talked about a bit. The Big 10 and the SEC, is that completely out of sight, out of mind, impossible? Is there no way to get Pitt wiggled into the Power 2 here? Is it Big 12 or bust if the ACC's gone?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think at this point, I think maybe early on, before Oregon and Washington really got added, there was certainly that conversation we talked about before, that there was a conversation about Oregon, Washington, adding those teams in. Kevin Warren was still the commissioner of the Big Ten. You had those conversations. I don't see the SEC going anywhere up north. I think that Greg Sankey has really developed himself in terms of who he's keeping in his region. He's really built a powerhouse down there. He's doing what he needs to do for the SEC. So I would say really the Big 12 is where it's at. And like you said, when it lines up with the Big 12, Pitt's in really good shape money-wise. I think, the really good thing since 2020, even with COVID, the applicants have been through the roof. I mean, we've actually broken records for applicants now. Here in Oakland, obviously, they've been rebuilding. I mean, it's been a $500 to $600 million rebuild for real estate for the school, and then we spent about $750 million for athletics in terms of new facilities. It's kind of funny. They got a whole brand new facility going up right now. It's the money aspect of it. It's just Pitt couldn't be in a better spot, which is a blessing. I think as most Pitt fans would tell you. Thank God, we have we're a top 20 endowment. We've got great academics. I mean, we've got great money flowing in. We've got big donors. That's the kind of stuff that you're happy to hear about. So if something would really happen, we really have all of that on our side, and I think that's really what's going to help us in the end, especially being in that top 30 to 40 range. It certainly helps.
I'm going to, before we close this out, JJ, kind of walk you into this next one. I will walk into a bar in Peoria, Arizona, and someone there has a Steelers hoodie on. I was hiking the Grand Canyon last week. Somebody had a Steelers hat on. And I know that doesn't exactly equate to the university, but it certainly speaks to the market, to the pull that Pittsburgh itself has, not just nationally, but internationally. And that is something that is looked at in these conversations: TV market size, valuation, in branding. Pitt is up there. If the Big 12 is able to secure this fish, what are we getting? How excited should Brett Yormark be if moving forward, Pitt is in his conference?
So I'd say really, you're getting a top 30 market, number one. Like you said, with the Pittsburgh Steelers, obviously us sharing facilities with them. We have two separate sides. The place is massive to begin with. But overall, you're getting a top 30 market. You're getting a rich tradition, University of Pittsburgh. But also, too, just look at the alumni around the country. With our NIL collectives, we were able to secure NIL subscribers from every single state in the country. So you're getting a wide variety. You're getting a top 30 to 40 brand overall in college, and really in college athletics to begin with. I'm blessed. To be honest with you, I'm happy to be a Pitt fan. We're always growing. But really, you're getting a passionate fan base, not to the extent of Penn State where it's 100,000. You're really looking at Pitt really getting the 40 to 50,000 strong, but to the point where really across the country We've got really some big donors around the country that love Pitt football, that fly in from all over the country. Doesn't matter where we go, if we're in Charlotte, if we're in Miami, if we go over to Phoenix, doesn't matter. It's a true blessing, but it's a great brand. And obviously I love the University of Pittsburgh, and it's been a great addition to anywhere we've been. So you're going to get certainly a good, passionate fan base, really competitive, but more importantly, just good people overall. And I think it'd be a really good fit for the Big 12 if that opportunity came.
I love just the idea of reviving Pitt and West Virginia in a conference game is huge. And JJ, as somebody I was at Baylor as a student when the Big 12 lost Oklahoma and Texas, and to hear these conversations happen and not have Baylor involved, like it sounded like the athletic brand was not enough to keep Baylor in a power conference. I remember what it was like to feel as though, okay, we're going to be given the Washington State treatment, which at the time we didn't understand, but that's where the trajectory was for Pitt. It's not. So the fact that you said blessed is a great way to put it. Pitt is in a beautiful spot in expansion and realignment, and that is something not every school can say. And I know it is something that you are covering consistently. Where can folks find your work?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter, or they call it X now, at JJ_Kitchen40. But also, too, you can find everything that we do over on Twitter at Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen. Again, it's been blowing up for quite a while now, just because, one, just the good people like yourself, but also, two, Jason Watkins, all those guys, Coos, you've had on here before. Just a good collective group of people who are very intelligent, knowledgeable, dedicated to the craft. That truly thankful to be on the show, and certainly hope to see people over at Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen.
Tell you what, there is an art I get to following the Brett McMurphys of college football, and those guys sure work hard. But I am a true believer that those in the weeds, those in these circles of college football, are the ones getting the most information first, and they're putting it out in a very journalistic and respectful way. JJ, you're one of those guys, along with Coos. You mentioned Watkins. They're always looking for information in the right places with fan bases and people in mind, more so than anybody else out there. It's always worth a follow. This has been and always will be Locked On. Come back next week as we talk more expansion, transfer portal, college basketball, college football, everything. And thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.